This is very serious. Donald Trump is trying to seize power over how states run their elections, and we're just weeks away from this midterm election. And if that were only what he was trying to do and not succeeding, we could say, okay, well, he's not going to get away with that. But the Supreme Court has now given him at least a temporary green light to do this. This did not get the attention it deserves. In a 6-3 decision along ideological lines, the conservative majority of the court lifted an injunction that was blocking key portion of Trump's executive order targeting mail-in voting. And what the order wants to do is create a federal list of eligible voters and tell the Postal Service only send ballots to people on this list. So think about what Donald Trump is trying to do. The federal government wants to put together a list. The Postal Service would be forced to look at that list. And if your name is missing or it's there incorrectly or whatever, an agency controlled by Trump could interfere with the delivery of your ballot right before an election in which Republicans and Trump are terrified that they're going to lose control of Congress. What could possibly go wrong, right? Now, Trump, of course, has spent 6 years now without evidence, claiming that mail-in voting is riddled with fraud. He votes by mail, of course, but it's fine for him to do it. And he has tried to impose a whole bunch of different voting restrictions through Congress. That hasn't really worked. So now he's trying to do it through executive power. And 6 conservative Supreme Court justices just allowed the administration to move forward, at least temporarily. Now, we need to be precise about what the court actually decided. The justices have not ruled that Trump has the constitutional authority to do this. They haven't ruled that he has the statutory authority to do this. What they said is the lower court intervened prematurely. Federal agencies hadn't yet completed their plans for how they would do this, and it was too early for an earlier court to intervene. This is an unsigned ruling from the Supreme Court, and it explicitly says whatever the government ultimately does might be legal. They're not saying it is or it isn't, but they're saying the intervention happened too soon. That technical distinction doesn't reduce the danger of this. The administration can keep building the machinery, and opponents are going to have to scramble to find new challenges. And we are weeks away from this election. Early ballots are going to be going out very soon. Now, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson made a statement about this, and she said the majority of focusing on the majority's focus on, better said, this technical procedural argument is ignoring that there's a broader effort being made by this administration to generate chaos ahead of the November elections. And this is often, unfortunately in practice, although to a degree it's how the Supreme Court operates, the Supreme Court will often make a decision on narrow technical grounds and avoid addressing the broader question, which is, can Trump just upend mail-in voting through executive order? Now, even if Donald Trump ultimately loses in court, this confusion can be very useful. Create a new voter list, change Postal Service procedures, force states to sue. Then people are unsure which ballot is going to come to me. Is it going to count? Is it not going to count? And then if Republicans lose, they can point to the chaos they created as evidence that it was illegitimate. States were sending out multiple different types of ballots. Well, that all happened because of what you were doing in court. Now, the administration of Trump insists that the final Postal Service regulations are much narrower than Trump's executive order. We're not going to have ballots rejected because the sender was absent from a voter list. Well, then why is Trump trying to insert himself in this process at all? States have the primary role of administering elections. And this is why when we spoke to attorney Mark Elias about Trump declaring an emergency to stop the midterms, he said, that's not really a thing. States decide that they are doing elections and how they are doing them and administer them. And you might have some Republican governors who hear Trump declare an emergency and they decide to play ball, but there's no way for the federal government to force states to say, we are not doing our elections. And that extends to this situation as well. Trump doesn't get to invent federal control over mail-in ballots just because Congress refused to pass his restrictions. Now, California says it's going to sue again. New York Attorney General Letitia James says this is not going to be the final word. Other courts are going to presumably find other ways to block this before November. But we should really understand what Trump is getting away with for now. He issues an executive order of very questionable legality. Lower courts block it. And then a Supreme Court with 3 of his own nominees says, we found a procedural reason to get rid of this obstacle. And the administration gets a step closer to using federal power to interfere between voters and their ballots. This is how you weaken a democratic system. You get a technical ruling here, an improvised power grab there, a confusing rule that is deliberately confusing, and the next thing you know, you have wreaked havoc on these elections. Now, I'm going to go back to what I said all the way. This is going to be an old one for some of our younger members in the audience. All the way back in 2012, when Mitt Romney was running against Barack Obama. In Pennsylvania, one of Romney's officials said, voter ID will deliver Pennsylvania to Mitt Romney and therefore the 2012 election. Now, Barack Obama ultimately won re-election and he won it easily. But the point here is, if you're convinced that you're going to win fairly, you don't start doing this stuff and you don't risk confusing people and creating chaos. And if you're convinced that you're going to win and it's that simple, you just let the election happen. You do this stuff if you suspect you may lose, and they suspect that they may lose. And that's why it's up to us. Listen, what can we do? On the one hand, we've got to vote. We've got to run up the score as much as we can, because the bigger the margins are, the more difficult it is to win by confusing some portion of voters or win by messing with mail-in voting or whatever the case may be. But on the other hand, and I say this every election and Democrats don't always come through, we have to make sure that we are pulling out every single stop to ensure that we've got lawyers, we've got poll watchers, we've got courts doing everything that can be done to prevent these federal power grabs over what at the end of the day are state administered and state elections. The problem at the states is there's a lot of wacky secretaries of state, attorneys general, and of course governors. So we've got our work cut out for us here. But the reward for knocking out Republican control of at least the House of Representatives would be a major victory, and we've got to make sure that it happens. Every political story has 2 parts: what happened and what different media outlets want you to think happened. And you can see the framing difference pretty clearly in this story about Donald Trump signing a $70 billion immigration bill after this long fight over ICE funding. On the left, the focus is, what will the money fund? Billions for the next 3 years of Trump's mass deportation campaign. On the right, the emphasis is Trump taking future ICE shutdowns off the table by signing the bill. One side is asking, what does this mean for immigration enforcement, for mass deportations? The other is framing it as Trump ending the threat of ICE shutdowns. This is why our sponsor Ground News is so useful, because it lets you compare coverage from the left, right, and center in one place, along with factuality ratings and info about who owns the outlets. I've been using Ground News for years. It can really help you see through the political spin that blinds a lot of news consumers. And right now you can get 40% off the same Vantage plan I use. Go to ground.news/Pakman. The link is in the description.